Good evening again. It's now 10:34 on the same third day of March, Sunday, March 3rd. And Candy is thrilled because she's two treats, one right after the other, pawing all over me. Give me a paw. Okay, lay down. Speak. Speak. Come up here. Come up here. Get in camera. Here we go. Candy the Wonder Pup. There you go. All right, this is going to be a deep dive. I've called this, I think, Unpacking the COVID narrative or something to that effect. I'm wearing a shirt right now that I got at a protest underneath. It says, "Open up all small business now. Enough is enough." I got this back in March, April of 2021 at a protest up in Peterborough, one that was attended by notably Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party of Canada, PPC. GRY Gearcom. Hey, two of us. Awesome. I take it that means you're a smoker. I'm going to be talking about smoking. There was something called the smoker's paradox that came out, but I want to go through this I am an old fart. I ramble. I go off in tangents. I'm going to try and keep this as focused as I can, but it's going to be a deep dive. If you like nicotine, eat eggplant, tomatoes, and green peppers. Check it out. It's in all three of those and more. How did we get where we are? How did everything related to COVID? How were they able to do all this? I've had videos taken down before, but I have got all my strikes back. YouTube has this function where if you have I had a permanent mark on my account for having breached community standards that never would come down. It would mean that if I violated community standards again within a prescribed time, I'd get a 7-day holiday, 7-day. I wouldn't be able to upload or post or comment or do anything. And that happened to me a couple times. And so, but they had this remedial little system where if you did the remedial training, you could have the strike removed. And I did it. And I answered the questions as they prescribed that they be as they prescribed, they be answered. Like, were the COVID vaccines rushed? Even though I know the answer, I put, no, they weren't. They went through all the same testing as every other drug or agent on the pharmaceutical product. Yeah, sure they did. You know, is COVID a serious and potentially deadly disease? Sure. I just put down what they wanted to hear. So I got the strike removed. So now I have a clean slate. And it's my understanding that if I breach community standards again, then I just get a strike and a warning. At least that's my understanding. So I'm going to push the envelope. I mean, what the heck? This is a miserable, unmonetized, you know, no production value little station. But how did we get to where we are now? First of all, we were primed for it. There were all kinds of movies like Contagion, Outbreak. I remember Outbreak very well. Outbreak starred Dustin Hoffman was in it, Kevin Spacey was in it, Rene Russo, Donald Sutherland, had an all-star cast. Hollywood's elite was in this movie. It's all the way back in 1995, so it's, you know, more than a quarter century old now, this movie. Brilliant movie, though. You know, it's Hollywood and great actors. And there was one particular scene in it. What they happened was a virus jumped from I believe it was from a monkey to a human, started spreading virally, going all over the place. And they showed this one guy who had come down with it, and he was quite sick, and he was in the movie theater, and he's coughing. And then they zoom in microscopically to show his aerosols and his droplets, and they show them traveling through the air, and then show another guy laughing at the whatever movie was on the screen, and haha, and you watch it go right into his mouth. And of course, the thing that saved everyone in this movie was a vaccine. Yeah, and so we were primed for this. Even The Simpsons with the, I believe it was the cat flu. Many will have seen the episode. I'm going to be saying a lot of things that I'm sure a lot of people will know already. I'm going to try and keep up with the comments as I go. And a Monarchy likes my shirt. The carbon they're trying to reduce is you. That's the ultimate agenda, is depopulation. That is a major component of it. I don't think that's all of it, but that's certainly a key and major component of it. And Anna Monarchy has a bit of tobacco and some Mary Jane. So there are three smokers here right now. I'm going to get onto the smoker's paradox. And Gearcom says the mRNA jabs are well tested. It is just that they have 100% success rate over 10 years, and we're going to get on to what their success is. But we were primed to. Predictive programming is a word that's often used. They predictably programmed that a viral pathogen would spread, and that all kinds of draconian measures would have to be imposed to keep the population safe. I want to address one issue, though. There's a lot of people who will say to you, viruses don't exist. And I've encountered these individuals. I don't think they're dumb. I don't think they're stupid or anything like that. I do not agree with them. I do think viruses are real. My degree in virology comes from the internet, though, so I'm not an expert. But with that being said, I think just about everyone has had an experience where someone has come home, had gotten some type of illness, like a flu-like disease, and then it travels through the family. It happened to us in February of 2022. 3-person household, actually 4. We have a border. 4-person household, and everyone got whatever the bug was. It started first with my little guy. This would be February 2022. We're all unjabbed. He came down with a fever on a Thursday night. By Friday, he was bouncing off the walls. Kids recover fast. They have an amazing immune system. I got it on the Friday. I had chills, spiked to fever, headache, all the classic symptoms we were told were related to COVID, but they're also related to countless other bugs and things that go around. But by Sunday, I was feeling 80, 90%. By Monday, I was right as rain. And again, not jabbed. Just going to keep up. Jason is pure blood. He knew it was a lie from day one. My own awakening, I knew that things did not make sense from the beginning. But I remember at the start, we had just gotten Candy the Wonder Pup. She was just a little puppy. And I thank God for the fact that we'd arranged to get her in February, because now I was allowed out of the house. I could go for a walk. You're allowed to go walk your dog. You remember this garbage? And I came across another woman walking her dog, and we let the dog sniff at each other. And I said, "How you doing?" She said, "Oh, I'm okay. How about you?" And I said, "I'm okay," but I was lying. Things just did not make sense. We had never dealt with, there have been outbreaks of contagious disease before in 68. From 68 to 70, there was the Hong Kong flu, and they had Woodstock. They had the Summer of Love. They didn't shut the world down and they didn't shut it down over H1N1. That's another point I'm going to have to get to, is the PCR test. They never had a PCR test back then to test everything that moved. And Monarchy said, when the government is so untrustworthy, some people just believe the opposite of what they say no matter what. I somewhat fall into that category. I call it being a contrarian. I have seen people say there are no contagious diseases. Yeah, and she brings up animonarchy. I think it's a she. I don't know. I just have that sense. That chicken pox is a good example. Parents used to have chicken pox parties. I've mentioned on this channel before that in bygone days, diseases like measles were called childhood diseases. And if you had 5 kids and one kid got measles, you'd put the other 3, 4 kids in bed with the sick one so that they would all get it and you would get it over with. Gearcom, I'm severely affected by shedding. Get on to shedding. I'll talk a bit about shedding and my views on it. Oh, sorry, Animonarchy. I don't know what it is. It's just the name. Just Animonarchy sounds like Anna Marie, Anima something, the way I'm saying it. I know it's probably got you're playing on anarchy. But anyway, so I do believe the SARS-CoV-2 virus is real. I don't believe that the National Virology Lab in Winnipeg is just a white elephant doing nothing. And likewise, all these bioweapon labs working on viruses in places like Ukraine and China and more. I don't think they're working on nothing. I don't think it's all a big smoke screen. I do believe viruses are real. The thing is, and I do think SARS-CoV-2 was created in a lab, most likely the coronavirus lab in Wuhan, China, their virology lab in Wuhan. The only thing is, I just think it was a benign, weak-ass little virus that they created. And part of the reason why I don't think they created a genuinely serious viral pathogen, something that could be deadly, is because the uber wealthy and the architects of this agenda, they live in this world too. And social distancing and masking and all this crap that we put up with is not going to stop a virus. There are common touch surfaces everywhere. Viruses, germs, bacteria, pathogens spread. And so I do not believe in any way, shape, or form that these individuals would intentionally release a truly deadly viral pathogen into the human population because they're part of the human population. And you can't sanitize the world or even a portion of it. And so they themselves would be at risk. And now I want to spring into the biggest objection people have to this agenda. This notion that instead of a pandemic, that it was planned. I'm leery of saying the word, putting those two together, because I think that sends off alarm bells. But the reason I believe that a lot of people will object to the notion that this could have all been planned is because they simply see it as too all-encompassing and too grandiose, and there is no way that it would come crashing down like a house of cards. And I think that is incredibly short-sighted, and I think it bespeaks a woeful ignorance of the manner in which this world operates. When we look at the Elon Musk, the Bezoses, the Warren Buffetts, the uber wealthy, we're talking about people who are worth 100, 200 million or more. They've got so much money. It's absolutely mind-blowing the amount of money they have. And there's something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need your basics. You need food, shelter, clothing. And once you have that, then you want a place, you get higher up and you want a place in the society. You want a feeling of self-worth and self-accomplishment. Then you want the esteem of others. And as you move higher and higher up, when you get to the level where you have $100, $200 billion in your wallet, more money than you could spend in 100 lifetimes, what you want is power and you want control. And when you have that amount of money, The amount of power and the amount of control you have is enormous, and you can then join in with like-minded individuals. And there are groups like we know about. We know about the World Economic Forum. It's a public institution. They're covered on the nightly news every February. The world's uber elite go to Davos, Switzerland, and they map out the direction for the world. And this is reported on the news. You know, they tell us, they program us what are the important issues. But that's a public group. There are other more clandestine groups that even aren't even in the realm of conspiracy theory. There's the Bilderberger group, or the Bilderbergs, or is how they're sometimes referred to, the royal family. And it's basically a microcosm of the World Economic Forum, but it's smaller and it's more clandestine. And there are loads of these groups. Skull and Bones is a famous one. That's a senior society at Yale University. And its members include George H.W. Bush, former president of the United States from 1988 to 1992. His son, George W. Bush, president from 2000 to 2008. It includes John Kerry, who ran against George W. Bush in 2004. Actually, I think he's still a current U.S. senator, and he's Mr. Climate Change guy now. And so the power that these groups have is enormous. I'm going to catch up a little bit. I have a brother and sister. This is Animonarchy. I have a brother and sister, and we all had chickenpox simultaneously, like me. I thought animal and anarchy sounded badass and masculine. My bad. I find Animonarchy goes on. I find cleaning chemicals worrisome. It was ridiculous in an LCBO I went in during the lockdowns, how they sprayed the card reader and keypad with poisons between every customer. I will not use hand sanitizer. That stuff is gross. It takes off a layer of your skin. Vinegar is perfect as a disinfectant. Alex Jones says in Skull and Bones, they lay down in a coffin and excrete their waste on one another. Yeah, don't worry about the typos. I can usually figure them out. I don't know how much. I know Skull and Bones is real. And proof that it's real is you can watch a guy by the name of, I believe his name is Chris Matthews on CNBC. Just type in George Bush, John Kerry, Skull and Bones, Chris Matthews into YouTube. And Chris Matthews says to both of them in two separate interviews, you're a member of Skull and Bones, the secret society. And they both acknowledge that they are. And he asks them to talk about it. And John Kerry says, well, then it wouldn't be a secret. And a senior society is different from a fraternity. In a fraternity, you pledge it as a freshman in your first year. And Animal House, you party and you build connections and friendships, and maybe that can help you in later life. But a senior society, you do not pledge until your senior year, your fourth year, when you're graduating. And as I have read with Skull and Bones and with others, there's the snake, all the Ivy League schools, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, have these senior societies, and they call it Tap Day. And basically, you're tapped. And there's a good movie out. Came out around the year 2000. It's either, I believe it's called Skulls. It might be Bones, but I think it's Skulls. And it's kind of a fictional, based on a true story type movie, based on a true story. And when you look at individuals like the Clintons, just for example, Bill Clinton and Hillary both won Rhodes scholarships. If you want to go down a rabbit hole, look into the Rhodes family, after which the former nation of Rhodesia was named. And their diamond mining in Africa and South Africa, and the wealth and the manner in which they were able to monopolize the diamond market. And now there's this Rhodes Scholarship. And this is how I'll call them the elites. I don't think they're elite. I think they're satanic. But this is how they're able to bring in capable individuals. And now individuals like Bill Clinton, I would argue Justin Trudeau, I would argue Tony Fauci, these individuals are brought into the fold, and they better play ball or they're out. And then you get an individual like Anthony Fauci, who is head of the National Institutes of Health in the United States, and he can end someone's career. So you better play ball. You better play ball. And we saw what happened to individuals who didn't play ball, individuals who tried to speak out during the pandemic. And there were countless individuals. And this is where I find it ironic that so many people say, well, there would be whistleblowers. Well, the whistleblowers were there, but you were programmed not to believe them and to put all your faith, trust, and blind allegiance into individuals like Anthony Fauci, who only got into the position he's in, hidden hand, because he sold out. And I've made a few just bullet points. So they released a mostly benign little respiratory bug, SARS-CoV-2, into the general population. Might have even been at that wet market. I tend to think it was out months before, but whatever. They released it into the population, and then they weaponized it. And I think a major key component of how they were able to weaponize it, firstly, around March 17th or March 18th, right around that date, there was the Imperial College of London. You don't get a more esteemed academic institution, especially in the field of science, than the Imperial College of London. And they had what they called their coronavirus response team. And they wrote a report. And that was the report that brought about the lockdowns. I don't know who the specific author of the paper was. It would be the head of the coronavirus response team. But this is the way groups like Skull and Bones, World Economic Forum, Club of Rome, Bilderbergers can get key individuals into place and then direct things from there. And everyone just better get in line, because if you don't get in line, your life could be destroyed. I mentioned before many times, Dr. Luc Montagnier, in late 80s, won a Nobel Prize sometime around 1990. He's the one who isolated the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, and he won a Nobel Prize. And he came out in April, May of 2020, saying that after having gotten a hold of the virus and examining it, he said, this virus has all the markings of a virus that was created in a lab. And he was slandered, pillared, deplatformed, everything. They destroyed this man. Same thing with Dr. James Redfield, former head of the CDC. Anthony Fauci shut him out when he expressed the expert opinion that the virus came from a lab. Going to catch up. The movie Eyes Wide Shut is supposed to be an apparently subdued but accurate representation of the Rothschilds and their parties, etc. I've never seen Eyes Wide Shut. I cannot. Tom Cruise. Dukes is saying they whacked the president of Tanzania, I believe it was. I remember the African president who did not go along with what was happening, and he died. Can we definitively say that they whacked them? Of course, we can't definitively say it, and we can't prove it, but I'm with you. Dukes is saying Kary Mullis invented the PCR test. He said on video, and I've seen this, that the test does not actually test for virus. So basically, it's really simple: no test, no virus. The PCR test, polymer chain reaction, I don't understand it in depth, but I read an article all the way back in August of 2020. It was published to the New York Times. It said your COVID test is positive. There's a 90% chance it shouldn't. It's a false positive. And they spoke to experts at Harvard's Howard Chen School of Public Medicine. And in this article, they talked about cycle thresholds. And basically, the best way I've heard it described is when you're holding your phone and you enlarge a picture. If you keep enlarging it on your phone or your computer or whatever, it pixelates and it just becomes a blurry mass of, you can't see what it is. And what they do with the PCR test is it's seeking out viral RNA to identify an individual as being infected with SARS-CoV-2, or I imagine any other virus they want. And it goes through cycle thresholds. And if they find it within the first 20 cycle thresholds, it's likely that you have an active infection. But once you get up to 30, 35, 40, you could be dealing with dead viral RNA from an infection that you had weeks or months ago, or possibly even a different coronavirus. There are other coronaviruses out there, and you could have dead viral RNA from an old MERS, which is Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which is also a coronavirus, or even the common cold, which is also a coronavirus. But the PCR test was key because it was able to feed the panic porn, because everything became about cases and cases and cases. And then New Direction from the World Health Organization mandated that any death with COVID was to be counted in the COVID column. So if someone got hit by a bus, but they had a positive test for COVID, that gets put into the COVID column. Toronto Public Health, on their official Twitter account, or what is now X, what was then still Twitter, said that even if a person has an underlying health condition and doesn't die of COVID, if they die with a positive PCR test, they're still counted with the COVID deaths. There was an article in the mainstream ABC News out of Colorado about a coroner in a small rural area who was forced to include 2 deaths from murder-suicide. They died of gunshot wounds, but they had positive COVID tests, so they were counted in with the COVID numbers. And she was complaining because it was a small rural area, and that's because it's a small area and they don't have many deaths, that really skewed the numbers. So I'm going to keep reading, try and keep up. So thanks, Dukes, for pointing out Kary Mullis. He said, the interview I saw, that the PCR test in of itself was not to be used as a diagnostic tool, that it was only to be used, it was to be used as part of a diagnosis, but not as the sole means by which you determine if a person is infected or not. And conveniently, Kary Mullis is dead. So we can't ask him his opinion anymore because he's no longer with us. Haitian president also got unalived. They told us you're asymptomatic, ha ha ha. Yeah, the first time, where being healthy was a symptom of being sick. Remember when not having any symptoms was a symptom? It was insane what they did. But the manner in which they were able to do it, and I think that's the most important point, is through these networks, one of the most heinous things I saw. There was a doctor in Canada. I would invite everyone to look this guy up. He writes a Substack. I don't think he can any way be accused of being controlled opposition because he is just too low profile. But he was a teaching surgeon at the University of Saskatchewan. And it was sometime in 2021 when they first started rolling out the jabs for children that Dr. Francis Christian, Francis, Christian like Christianity, Dr. Francis Christian, he went public about the risk reward benefit and does a child really need to take this mRNA jab when they're a young, healthy child? What is their risk from COVID? And they took away his they took away his teaching privileges at the University of Saskatchewan. They took away his license to practice medicine. And he's an incredibly sharp individual because when they called him to notify him of all these harsh disciplinary measures that they were taking against him, they had the dean of medicine at University of Saskatchewan on the phone. They had someone from the Ministry of Health talking to him, and I believe a third individual as well, maybe the head of his department. And it was they ganged up on him. And he's a smart man. He recorded the conversation, and the Center for Constitutional Freedoms in Canada, the one who was fighting all the lawsuits, for anyone having their businesses taken away and everything else, on their website, they have an audio clip download of the conversation. And it is scary what they were saying to this man. There was one woman, I think she was with the health ministry. She was saying, "Now, Francis, you sound really upset. You're starting to worry me." And the guy was perfectly sane, calm, and rational. And what occurred to me is they're trying to set it up. We spoke to him on the phone, and he did seem quite upset. So maybe we should have anticipated something tragic happening. But he got out in front of it, recorded the phone call, and it was published to the internet. And you could see and you wonder, and people say, well, it could never happen that people would speak out. Look what happened to the people who did speak out. I've got Sandy Sanderson saying biowarfare, soften up the target from within. The mRNA jab, that was the goal from the beginning. I recognized it April, May of 2020, that holy crap, they're going to force a jab on us. I was in the military at the time, and I knew it was coming. I was in the communication branch, signals. Some might know the term SIGINT. I won't say anymore. Dukes is saying Carrie Mullis, the inventor of the PCR, died August of 2019, before so-called COVID existed, but somehow invented a test for it. Laughable. Probably is some academic research benefit to a PCR test, just not as a diagnostic tool for a virus. Sandy Sanderson is saying, I won't repeat it, but I agree with you 100%. And that was the goal from the very start. And I want to get on to this. We were talking about smoking earlier, and we need to talk about ivermectin. And also, to a degree, hydroxychloroquine. Gosh, can't pronounce half these things. Everyone will remember Joe Rogan famously apparently got very sick with COVID, and under a doctor's care, he was prescribed ivermectin in combination with zinc and one or two other drugs or substances as a kind of a little cocktail. And apparently he recovered fully and no long-lasting no long-lasting effects, right as rain within a few days. And this is something that needs to be remembered. I personally, I don't know whether ivermectin works or not. And I was a little concerned with, I have a friend in southwestern Ontario who was selling bootlegged ivermectin that he was getting delivered up from the US because lots of people wanted this stuff. And it's medication. And my buddy isn't has no medical degree. And I don't care if it's an over-the-counter medication or not. You've got to be careful self-medicating. But at any rate, maybe it had some benefit, maybe not. But very quickly, a study was published to the Lancet, which is probably one of the world's, if not the world's most preeminent medical journal, the Lancet. And they published an article that a research paper which trashed ivermectin, actually, I believe, said it was dangerous. And so immediately there were already studies that had started. There were studies planned. They were all canceled because of this article in the highly prestigious Lancet Journal of Medicine. And then we find out, and it was published by The Guardian, which is a publication I don't care for too much because they tilt way too far to the left, but they got it right on this one. And other publications covered it as well. That research paper was from a company called Surgisphere. Surgisphere listed only 3 employees on its corporate profile. 3 employees. The president of the company was a doctor who was facing multiple malpractice suits. The second individual was a writer of science fiction, and the third was an exotic dancer. And it turned out that the data on which their study was based was fraudulent. The Lancet medical journal, peer-reviewed science, most preeminent medical journal in the world, published data, peer-reviewed, based on fraudulent data, and they had to retract it. How does that happen? And the way it happens is because the senior editor at the Lancet, my guess, we're running this one. I got some buddies who want to curry my favor to give it the peer review needed. Now get it out there. We're going to kill this ivermectin. Why? Because if, and again, I don't know if ivermectin is an effective treatment or not, and I don't care. But if an effective medication was found, then that takes away the ability to rush through a vaccine, and it eliminates the possibility of having in the United States an emergency use authorization, or in Canada of what we called it in Canada, an interim authorization. It's not authorized, but in the interim, we're going to let people take it. And I'm going to publish this to the live chat. I just want to share and put a fine point on this. That's a Government of Canada website for committee hearings. And this is Anthony Housefeather, who was a former parliamentary secretary in the Trudeau government. He's no longer, he's still an MP, but sometime after he made this statement in a committee hearing, he's no longer a parliamentary secretary. Why? I don't know. But in speaking of the pharmaceutical companies, he said that the pharmaceutical companies, quote, were being told to rush vaccine production and do testing in an unprecedented way, in a way they don't normally do it. Didn't have the same scrutiny as always. And then he goes on, these companies were exposed to a way higher liability in putting their products on the market than they normally would be, because they didn't do the type of testing that normally means these drugs take years to come to market. They did it all in less than a year. That's why these companies said that if they were going to deliver the product that they hadn't tested in their normal way, they wanted to have different conditions. And one of those conditions is that anyone who wants to see the contracts that the government of Canada signed with Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, if we want to see these contracts, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which will put the legal onus on you. You could be subject to action being taken against you if you were to divulge publicly. And as far as I'm aware, only our members of parliament have the option to sign an NDA so that they can see it, but then they can't talk about it. Anna Monarchy says, more official COVID deaths equal more money for the hospitals and doctors. They were getting paid more for labeling deaths as caused by COVID. Everyone talks about how Canada did so much better. Oh, we did so much better than the US because we were better at locking down and we were more compliant. And we were better with masking. Bullshit. In the United States, and again, this is mainstream media reporting, a Minnesota state legislator, either a state senator or state member of the state house, but a Minnesota state legislator said that any hospital that identified a patient as having COVID, that was worth in and around $10,000. He noted that the amount of money, it came from Medicare, which is the federal agency. They do have some form of socialized medicine in the United States. If you're over the age of 65, you qualify for Medicare, and Medicare provides funding. There's billions of dollars of fraud that take place with the Medicare system. And it's not just for people over 65, but that's just one example. But anyway, in a US hospital, if they had a patient come in and they diagnosed the patient with COVID, that earned the hospital $10,000 in and around. Higher cost areas would get more, lower cost hospitals would get less. So a New York City hospital might get 12 or 13, I don't know, but it would be higher. And a hospital in rural Alabama would not get the same amount. They would get lower because their costs are lower. And then if a patient was put onto a ventilator, ka-ching, ka-ching, then it got up in and around $30,000. So the profit-driven medical system in the United States was incentivized to both overdiagnose COVID and to put patients onto ventilators. And there's more. I mean, the manner in which this is weaponized, and again, the manner in which they're able to control and get everyone playing along, is because you're dealing with individuals at the top of the pyramid with more money than God who can spread it around. And if you don't play along, they can destroy your life. They can make it sound, they can try and gaslight you so that if some unfortunate accident happens to you, maybe they'll say, well, you did it to yourself. Going to catch up. Sandy is saying something about the PCR test and Dr. Hodges. Gearcom is saying, saw that, it is good. I don't know which, I'm not keeping up. Gearcom is saying fenbazidol or something, might be. Gearcom believes that one of these drugs works like magic. It actually won a Nobel Prize. Just talk about ivermectin. It won a Nobel Prize. It was a horse medication or a veterinary medication that was then found to have efficacy in human beings for all manner of things as an anti-inflammatory and others, I believe. Don't quote me though. And CNN famously slandered Joe Rogan, said, why are you taking horse paste, Joe? Come on, don't be dumb like Joe Rogan. And there's a large chunk of the population who take their marching orders from television. If CNN says that Joe Rogan is taking horse paste, they believe it, even though it was a total lie. And Rogan had Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who is kind of CNN's medical expert for all things and had been the key go-to guy for all things COVID. He had Sanjay Gupta on his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, and absolutely eviscerated him. Why are you lying to people? And Gupta had to admit that CNN was lying to people because he had the medication. Oh, you've got the package here. And Monarchy, I think Joe took hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin both. I do know it was ivermectin. I do know he took zinc was included in the mix, and there were one or two other compounds, maybe hydroxychloroquine, I don't know. Yeah, and he felt great within a couple days. Sharunian Allegiance is saying, love the shirt. Ebola was another virus that came from West Africa, though it was epidemic, not, it was I think the word you're looking, well, it might have been an epidemic and not pandemic. SARS-CoV-2, we all got it. I'm convinced I had it in February of 2022, but I didn't mess up my system by taking a suboptimal jab that does not provide sterilizing immunity. I want to talk about something else. I think I've linked it down below in the description to this video. I was fortunate enough 7-8 months ago to be on a podcast with Robert Malone, and I know he's something of a polarizing figure because this whole notion of controlled opposition, and he worked at the prestigious Salk Institute, which you've got to be a genius to work there. It's a research laboratory type facility where they work on medical science at the absolute highest levels. And I got a real sense of who Robert Malone is from that podcast. He was identified early as having genius level IQ. And he spoke about it during our podcast because I framed a question to him. I said, if you could talk to your 27, 28-year-old self when back 1987 or so, and you're working at the Salk Institute, what would you say? And he said, normally that question gets framed to me under in the context of how do you live with yourself? You monster. And that wasn't the way I was framing it at all. And I think he understood that. But he was very driven because of parental pressure to reach the highest heights, to win a Nobel Prize. And the medical science field is as political as any other and as competitive as any other. And there is backstabbing, and there is, he described it, if you want to watch that, it's a long, hour-and-a-half long dissertation. He described it as a mafia. And yeah, when you get to the upper levels of academia, of medical sciences, of the corporate world, it is a mafia. And you better play along. And if you're not willing to play along, you're going to be shut out. And so you have to decide what is important to you. Now, what happened with Robert Malone is he got pushed out. He was told, you will never get a National Institute of Health grant. You'll never get an NIH grant. And he never did. And so he ends up, he's got a wife, he's got kids, he's got a mortgage, and he ends up working for startups and, just trying to pay the bills. And then he's brought in and he works in kind of the DARPA type field, if you know that term. With bioweapons research and things like that, with DARPA money funding the programs. And this is where he's sometimes accused of being controlled opposition or whatever. Going to keep going. Gearcom is saying, very good summary so far. Got to go. I hope this does not get struck as I want to watch all of this. Thanks. No worries. Appreciate you. Appreciate the engagement, everyone. Amonarchy, Gearcom, Dukes. There's a couple I missed. Sandy. This is what I really enjoy when I'm able to talk with like-minded people. And at the same time, hopefully open up a few eyes, because this isn't over because these mRNA jabs have no long-term safety profile. They worked on mRNA for 20 plus years, never once got an approved product. Many will know about the mRNA animal study on, I think it was lemurs or ferrets. I think it was ferrets, lemur, ferret, and they all died. I happen to think they know very well what mRNA technology can do. My limited understanding, and I got into this a bit with Dr. Malone, is that there's a nanolipid particle and it's got the spike building instructions on them. Normally, I learned so much during this pandemic. I'm not a scientist. I'm not in the medical profession. I don't have a degree in the sciences. My education was centered on political science and the humanities. However, I did take psych and I did take environmental ecology. I took some science-based courses at university, but I wasn't centered on that. So I don't consider myself completely I don't consider myself to be scientifically illiterate. I know what a double-blind placebo-controlled trial is and how it actually works. And anyway, my understanding of the mRNA jabs is this. An old vaccine would actually contain either inactive, dead virus or weakened virus of measles, mumps, rubella, polio, hep, whatever. And so you get either a weakened version of the live virus or dead virus. It goes into your deltoid. Your immune system recognizes invader alert, learns how to develops antibodies to respond. And then if you actually get hit with wild virus that's circulating in the world, then your system has learned how to fight it. And I found out one of the earliest examples of vaccination in a primitive form occurred during the American Revolution, when George Washington had to decide whether or not to vaccinate the Continental Army. Smallpox had already gone through, the British troops were largely immune to it. It had torn through Britain. They had the Hessian, the Prussian mercenaries who were fighting for the Brits. They'd all had it, but the Americans had been somewhat removed from it. And so ultimately he decided to vaccinate the troops. And what they would do is they would take someone with an active smallpox infection. They would break open a pustule, a little, like a mump, like a node. They would break open the pustule. Then they would take a piece of thread, run it through, and get the pustulates, the pus, onto this thread. Then they would take the unvaccinated person, open up a vein, and run this infected thread through. It was a primitive form of vaccination, introducing the virus to people. And some people died after that quote unquote vaccine, because it would be live virus that they were encountering. Monarchy is saying with respect to Joe Rogan that CNN was trying to make him look more sickly with their cinematography, with the way that they would shade the pictures. Absolutely, I saw that. That was nuts. Dukes is saying it's my stance that all these things, like ivermectin, leaked Ukraine labs, gain of function research, was just these psychopaths' way of validating the virus as being real. I do think it was a real virus. I just think it was a weak-ass little virus. As I say, I don't think, the Wuhan virology lab, our lab in Winnipeg, the one famously, now that we found out that those Chinese nationals who were fired from it, that they were, there was all kinds of espionage. A lot of it, you have difficulty deciding what's real, what's the sideshow. Just reading the rest of what Dukes is saying, just his opinion. No disrespect to anyone who believes the virus was anything but the same old respiratory response illness we've always had. I was actually in the hospital with pneumonia Feb 2020, and I watched as the mainstream media outlets show the footage of people just dropping over dead in the streets of Wuhan. Like what? There's a gentleman on here on YouTube. His name is Dr. John Campbell. He is a nurse practitioner and a professor of nursing. And at the beginning of the pandemic, he was all compliant. Whatever the authorities told him, he was parroting it. They would, garbage in, garbage out. They told him garbage. He spewed it back out as gospel truth. And I don't know when exactly it was. I mean, he was advocating for the vaccines, but then he had an epiphany. He did a complete 180. And now he's one of the most prominent voices out there, Dr. John Campbell. And he has a video out just today. It dropped within the last few hours. He's in the UK. And what he's been harping on lately, where he's been focusing on lately, is excess deaths. And in the UK, a number of MPs and members of the House of Lords have just published a public letter calling on the government. It's been delivered to the government, to the responsible government agencies, but also to the public at large. And they want to see an accounting for the excess deaths that have been happening in 2021, 2022, 2023, and now in 2024. And what they want is it stratified by sex, by age, anonymous data, so that individual privacy is not compromised. And they want to know, what the rolling 5-year, how many 20-year-olds die on average in the first week in March, and then how many died during 2024, 2023 in that same first week, and what was their vaccination status. Because here's the thing. One of the things that Dr. John Campbell brought out was that the National Health Service, and he's got videos on this, they mandated their protocol for treating an elderly patient, like someone in a long-term care who's identified as having a COVID infection, that if they showed signs of respiratory distress, meaning they're having trouble breathing, that the protocol was to prescribe them. He uses the actual brand or proper drug name. I'm going to use the more broad term. Morphine and opiates are the two drugs that was their protocol. You have an elderly patient diagnosed with COVID, struggling or having in respiratory distress, having trouble breathing, prescribe them opiates and morphine. And then it said in their protocol, and do not be concerned that this combination of drugs will suppress respiration. Someone's having trouble breathing, let's give them a drug combination that's going to suppress their breathing further. So the question is, how many of these people would have recovered if they'd simply been given oxygen or something, or maybe even just left to their own? It came out famously, the Canadian Armed Forces sent medics into long-term care facilities in Quebec, CHLSCDs, I forget what they're called en français, but they're long-term care homes, because staff was not showing up because staff was too afraid of COVID, and people were dying of dehydration, and they started counting them as COVID deaths. So getting on, Anna Monarchy said they used to expose people to cowpox too, to get some cross immunity to smallpox. I think that is true. That is true. There's an old expression that came out of Great Britain. They would say, the girl is so pretty, she has the complexion of a milkmaid. Smallpox is a disease that causes like acne type sores, pustules. And then once they break and everything, someone would have a pot-marked face, the way you would see with someone who has suffered bad teenage acne, and the pock marks that they get. Well, that happened often with smallpox. You could tell someone who had smallpox, but milkmaids, because they were exposed being around cows, they were exposed to cowpox, which is in the same family as smallpox. They were immune, and so their complexion would be beautiful. Dukes is talking about John Campbell, legend. Couldn't stand him at first, obviously. I didn't see him at first. I didn't see him until after he had his epiphany. And Sandy watches him regularly. And Sandy, I think, has given me the name of the drug, midazolam. And I believe midazolam is the brand name or a proper name for what's more broadly termed as morphine. Morphine it dulls your senses, and opiates are based on opium, which is where you get heroin. It's just a happy drug to keep you calm, and while you're unable to breathe. Johnny Appleseed is talking about blood clots, and Dr. Campbell has some videos up talking with people in the mortuary business, undertakers and such, those who cut into the cadavers, and I guess they take all the bodily fluids out, and they're finding these horrible blood clots. This was the ultimate goal of the shots, in my estimation. Non-expert, blah, 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 community standards people. Sorry for that. That's for the community standards people. And now what's happening is excess deaths. If genuinely we were in a pandemic in 2020, 2021, before the vaccine rolled out by and large, then there's something in medicine, in epidemiology, it's called dry tinder theory. And it's this idea that within the population, there are always people who are susceptible to viral pathogens like influenzas, RSVs, and SARS-CoV-2, whatever's going around. There are frail, weak individuals, a lot of them in our long-term care homes. We're like in Ontario in 2019, 75% of long-term care residents already had some form of cardiovascular disease to start with. So they're the dry tinder. And SARS-CoV-2 or any viral pathogen comes along, and it's like a wildfire, and it burns that dry tinder. But then once it's moved through, then excess deaths should be going down because the dry tinder has been cleaned out. But the problem is, even Canada's death figures in 2020, our deaths were 305,000. It was roughly what we were expecting. We were expecting 7.803 deaths per thousand of population, according to Macro Trends, which is a site I look at for data and statistics. And they had the UN projections going forward, and our death rate was expected to climb marginally, and it's supposed to continue climbing until sometime 2040, 2050, because of the baby boomers getting older. But we should be, that dry tinder got burned through. And so now the conceivably, now that 80% of our deaths were said to have been in long-term care facilities, well, that dry tinder has been burned through. Now who's dying? And we're not getting the data. And it's because of this, I call them Masonic networks. And you can call it World Economic Forum, Bilderbergers, Club of Rome, Trilateral Commission. There are all kinds of these groups. They are, in my books, absolutely 100% interconnected. And the data, the information is being withheld from us. And anyone who does blow a whistle immediately gets slandered, deplatformed, censored, and the unthinking mob just believes whatever they hear on the CBC, CNN nightly news. And Sandy is saying they vented them red rum, for those who've seen The Shining. Dukes, is anyone here familiar with Austin Whitsitt? His channel name is Witsit Gets It. He recently made a very interesting and disturbing video. What's in these jabs? Video is entitled Zombies. Is that available here on YouTube, or is that RUMBLE or BITCHUTE or Odyssey or some other alternative platform? I'll be very interested to see if this video stays up. I wanted to include a bunch of the links to, like the one for Anthony Housefeather admitting in our House of Commons that the reason that no one can see the contracts that were signed with the pharmaceutical companies is because the vaccines did not go through the proper testing. And so they wanted a special deal so that they were indemnified, a nice fancy word that means we can't sue them when they screw us up. I mean, this is horrible. I'll end it off because I've gone on over an hour now. I'll end it off by talking about the Tusk. It's part of the conversation I got into with Dr. Robert Malone. And I was talking about this proclivity of people to take anyone who's in the medical profession, anyone, certainly doctors and medical scientists and researchers, and to put them up on this pedestal. The term he used, he called it the Church of Scientism. And this idea that that saints in surgical garb. And there was a study done in Alabama, in a place called Tuskegee, Alabama. And this should be an eye-opener to any, especially to Americans, but Americans are no better or worse than anyone else. They're as prone to evil as any other population. And their medical professional, government medical profession, went into a predominantly Black region of Alabama called Tuskegee. And they wanted to study the progression of syphilis that was untreated. And so they recruited typically Black, poor men, and they said, we're going to treat you for bad blood, which was a local euphemism, a local expression. When anyone was sick, they would say, oh, you got bad blood. And so they said, we're going to treat bad blood. And so lots of men signed up for this study. It started in the 1930s. So we're only talking 70 years after slavery ended. I mean, the educational level of these individuals is incredibly poor. They're living through the Jim Crow South period. I mean, it's disgusting what went on in the American South. And then the U.S. government goes in with their medical officials, and they would track the progression of syphilis and do nothing to treat these individuals. If any drugs they would get would just be placebos, sugar pills, and they tracked the progression of the disease. And that study went on even after penicillin was invented, which would cure. So these individuals, instead of cure, when a cure was available, they let them suffer and die. And the study went on for 40 years, from I think it was 32 to 1972. And who was brought to, who went to jail? Who was charged? Nobody. Zero. The only thing that ever came out of that was in the 1990s, the U.S. government issued a formal apology to everyone who had participated in the Tuskegee studies. Animanarchy saying that apparently summer weather causes heart attacks these days. Everything causes heart attacks. I was just at church on Sunday. Apologize for the profanity that I throw in every now and again, but I don't think I swear a lot. Sometimes, though, it's warranted. The English language is a poor means of communication. You got to use every tool in the box sometimes. But the number that's my largest community group with which I'm involved, and the number of deaths happening and the number of people coming down with cancer, aggressive cancers and kidney issues and everything else is insane. And I want to see from the Canadian side, I hope that this British group that Dr. John Campbell is running up the flagpole, I hope the numbers come out there, and I hope they come out here in Canada. I want to see a line-by-line entry. I want to see the same type of data. I want to see how many people were dying. What's the 5-year average for, 10 to 15-year-olds, and what is it now? And I also want to know the vaccination status of the individuals who are dying. And if there is no correlation, great, then we can put it to bed and we can say, fair enough. There's no correlation. But if it's overwhelmingly among the vaccinated, now we have the possibility that what everyone here suspects. And Monarchy says, if I got that right, resveratrol. I mean, I know the one you're talking about. That was the one they said they supposedly gave to Trump, Restemivir or something like that. And I think I've become incredibly skeptical of the entire pharmaceutical industry. So much, my eyes have opened up so much to what's gone on in years previous, 2000 to 2005. Pfizer had a drug on the market called Bextra, Bextra, an anti-inflammatory, and it caused all manner of heart problems and deaths, and in 2005 had to be removed from the market. Approved as a safe and effective anti-inflammatory medication from 2000 to 2005, then it's removed. And it did not have an emergency use or an interim authorization. It went through the full process and scrutiny. And if you Google search Pfizer repeat offender, you'll find a PubMed article from the U.S. Centers for Biological Research or something like that, a division of Anthony Fauci's own NIH. And it refers to Pfizer as a repeat offender in terms of withholding negative trial events, engaging in fraudulent marketing practices, bribing doctors. And this is the companies to whom we entrust our public health. And so my caffeine and my nicotine notwithstanding, probably in the last 6 months, I've taken one Advil, and I don't even like taking that now. I don't like taking anything. I take turmeric and vitamin D in the winter. Yeah, she got it, Restemivir, or I can't pronounce half these things. Dukes is saying, Austin starts the video on YouTube, then 45 minutes, he switches over to ROKFIN for the juicy parts that wouldn't be allowed on YouTube. Be interesting to see if this stays up. I'm miserable, pathetic channel. I mean, I'm thrilled with 640 whatever subscribers I have. Wow. For me, that's amazing. But, I realize that in the YouTube world, that makes me a guppy. That makes me I'm plankton in the YouTube ocean. I'm not even a tuna. Anna Monarchy says, if someone wears a lab coat on TV, you know they must be telling you the truth, right? When that video came out with Doctors for Truth or whatever, and I remember there was a black lady with she sounded like she had an African or maybe a Caribbean accent, I forget, but they were all wearing their lab coats. And I went, oh, go away with the lab coats. I think they were talking about hydroxychloroquine at the time, or ivermectin, or goodness knows what. And this is the unfortunate thing. You talk about controlled opposition. I think sometimes, certain content is allowed to get out there because it's meant to make anyone who doesn't go along with the narratives look like, oh, you're one of those people. Duke says, unfortunately, I personally know quite a few people who have been injured by this thing, a few more than injured. This is the thing. I'm willing to say definitively that I cannot prove, obviously, cause and effect. Causation, correlation does not prove causation. But the number of people I know who have had strokes, heart attacks, and other autoimmune diseases, I've got to be up around 25, 30 over the last 3 years. And in the 10 years before, I might have known one or two. And now I'm like 25, 30. And these are people with whom I have, two are family members. Well, three. I have a family member, 38 years of age, 6 foot tall, 180 pounds, 38 years old, younger than me, healthier than me, you know, taller than me, lighter than me, exercises more than me. He's got a workout. He's got an elliptical and a treadmill in his basement. Guy had a heart attack. And this is a family member. It's not my cousin's friend. Johnny Appleseed. Must be talking about what I was talking about with the Tuskegee study, syphilis. Did I say syphilis? I think I did. That was what they were studying. They wanted to see how it would progress if left totally untreated. Duke says, unfortunately, I personally know quite a few people who have been injured. Yeah, I read that already. And Monarchy takes multivitamins and liquid nascent iodine. And I can't pronounce that. And my wife takes that. What's it? I can't pronounce it. I don't like taking Tylenol or Advil. I don't take Tylenol, but sometimes Advil, and it does work. I have arthritic knees. I'm old. Played basketball all my life. Dukes is asking me for my thoughts on the shape of the planet Earth. Oh, man, I don't care. Whether the Earth is round or flat, my world stays the same. Honestly, that's the way I look at it. The most intriguing thing I've ever seen, though, is I don't know what it is. I looked it up at one point, but for every X number of miles you go, the Earth is there's supposed to be a drop off, the curvature. And I've seen evidence on YouTube. Guys will show a high-powered telescope or a high-powered lens on a camera, and it's able to go 50, 60, 80 miles, and you see everything's perfectly flat. You would think that 60, 70, 80 miles away, it should be below the horizon, but it can, and that's something I would like to do on my own, just for my own edification to see, hey, because I do have a questioning mind. I take very little, with each passing year, the things that I used to accept blindly are becoming fewer and fewer. Mud Duck Farmer says, I know someone too was fine 3 days after shot in hospital and brain dead. Amonarchy, my parents both took the jabs and got sick and diagnosed twice, including after their 5th jab. Yeah, if you have time, you want to see that podcast I did with Robert Malone. It's amazing. Because we got into talking, and I can't believe it stayed up on YouTube, but it did. And the thing, for a vaccine to work, it has to provide sterilizing immunity. And this has got to be the leakiest vaccine that I've ever heard of, because everyone I know who's been jabbed has gotten COVID. The vaccine that doesn't vaccinate, the immunization that doesn't immunize. Sandy, oh, there we go. Dukes, 8 inches per mile squared. Yeah, I knew it was something like that. I couldn't remember. And he says it's the Nikon Coolplex 1000 times zoom camera. And Sandy is citing the Bible for her, his or her. Sandy can be either, like Anna Monarchy. I messed that one up. I don't want to get on to that because, frankly, I don't care. And I don't mean that to be rude. It's just flat around, my world doesn't change. Okay, Sandy, him. All right. Unfortunately, certain names, Sandy, Leslie, even Carol. Yeah. Anyway, God bless you all. Thank you so much for watching. I think I've covered just about everything I wanted to cover. I went off on a bunch of tangents, but this is what I enjoy. The jokes, I tell that to kind of build my channel. And it's only since started telling Trudeau jokes that I went from 160 to 180. And then within less than a month, I added like 400 subscribers. And I want everyone who's subscribed, thank you, because the more subscribers you have, the more likes you get, the more comments you get, the more engagement you get. Apparently, if I understand this right, that kind of defeats the algorithms and it increases your channel's exposure. And I also know that if people look at a channel and they say, oh, he's got 500, oh, yeah, okay, I'll subscribe. But if they look and they go, oh, he's only got 150, pass. Well, thanks, Sandy. I can figure out what GBY means. And I don't know how good or great or whatever it was, but I really enjoyed it. And the next one I'll be doing, I don't know on what topic, will be Wednesday. I've decided that the best days for me, because I don't work Sundays and I don't work Wednesdays. So those 2 evenings, I'm going to be talking about the news of the day. Might talk a bit more about the situation in Israel and some faith-based thoughts that I have on it. Talking about so-called supersessionist or replacement theology, and what significance, if any, does the land of Israel have? And I have my views. I do think there is significance, but I don't understand it. But I can explain the reasons why. I think the land of Israel, God has his eye on it. That's what I believe. And I'll back that up with scripture. But that'll be Wednesday. And between now and then, I will have some jokes. I've got a really good one that I've been holding back. It's a general joke. But anyway, God bless, and we'll talk to y'all later. Thanks for watching. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. And thanks everyone for the thumbs up I've already gotten. And thank you for those that come. Talk to you later.